Hey there, it's Nathan. I just wanted to share some of my thoughts about Oppenheimer, give it a brief review, as well as an additional discussion about other possible parallels with our society. So first, Christopher Nolan. Always really enjoyed his work. He's a groundbreaking director. All his films have a magnificence and an awe about them, and I also noticed he kind of has a filmmaking technique of pace, where everything kind of has a sense of moving forward at a fast and deliberate pace, even while the events aren't necessarily progressing rapidly. I think this creates tension and a very exciting viewing experience. I also saw he likes to stay one step ahead of the audience, which I can definitely tell when watching his films. In this way, he respects the audience and also assumes intelligence with the audience as well. Also gives reason for discussion after the movie, which I think is always good, and multiple watches. The black and white I thought was a really nice touch here. Added variety and made every part of the movie feel that much more significant. Also time. Definitely seems like Christopher Nolan utilizes time often in his films. Utilizes every phase, finding importance and significance with every phase, while also being able to connect it all by the end of the movie at the conclusion. I do think a lot can be gained and learned from what happened before in history, as well as being present, in addition to thinking about the future. Cillian Murphy, excellent actor and excellent casting. He definitely has a distinct aura about him and kind of a thoughtfulness too that really sets him apart from other actors. So just did an absolutely phenomenal job here. Robert Downey Jr. An unexpected but pleasant surprise, especially with the magnitude of his role, especially near the end of the movie. I do think at least one of his scenes was definitely award worthy. I thought he actually might be Truman at first when seeing the trailers. Einstein, another awesome addition. Great casting here as well. Definitely raised the film even higher, and he had a lot of very impactful messages around his character as well. Rami Malek, another great addition. Didn't have too much, but just his presence, added to the film. And I think his character also had a very impactful message, kind of looking at a person as a whole. Oppenheimer may not have treated him the best in the times that they encountered each other, but it still seemed like he defended him in court. At least judging from Robert Downey Jr.'s expressions. So to me, this was kind of showing that instead of judging Oppenheimer by just one or two instances, it seemed like he was looking at his entire character, him as a whole. Building a team, I thought, was another powerful message here. How Oppenheimer was willing to recruit and have other brilliant minds around him, and not just do everything by himself. And also being willing to learn and gain inspiration from others as well. Kind of working together to achieve goals and even greater. Having more than just one mind. I also noticed that there was a very thorough and full exploration of Oppenheimer as a person. So I thought this was also a very important and significant aspect of the film as well. Truman, a welcome and interesting addition and representation. Made me want to go back and watch speeches and interviews to see how he was, as president. I also think he had an important message about who the public will look to as a cause of events or even assign blame, I thought this was another powerful message. Another message, taking over, kind of how quickly Matt Damon's character, who, by the way, was fantastic as well, kind of how he and the military, how quickly they kind of took over from Oppenheimer once his work was complete. Practically kind of left him in the dust in a way. To me, this is kind of showing how quickly people can kind of just start to overlook you or kind of seize power if it's available to them. So this is also interesting, and to me, an important message about how this can happen in certain circumstances. The film Identity was also interesting. It definitely stayed close to Oppenheimer and the events around him, as opposed to exploring the war or other similar venues, as well as having a focus on the trial and interrogations. I think this did maintain the tone and identity as more of a biopic instead of some kind of war epic, which I don't believe the film was attempting to be. So I think this did work out really well. People standing with others also was another interesting aspect here to me, about how much of an impact what people think about others and kind of their standing with them can have. For example, with Oppenheimer's trial and interrogations, kind of how they answered the questions, how they answered for him, defending him or not defending him. To me, it feels like there could be a dangerous emphasis on people's personal evaluations when it comes to important matters. Like, for example, how our entire society is run, or like with high-level business deals, and even political policy. And even with people as well, how this can significantly affect how their lives move forward. So I do believe that there are definitely many situations where it could be beneficial if there was something more concrete or absolute when dealing with matters that are so significant for society and for people. And lastly, intent. I think intent can be very important to think about in many areas of society. Many things have good intentions, and others may just be neutral, and others may not have the best intentions. I think the film definitely brought to light the idea of intent, especially when it comes to Oppenheimer's after the demise of Germany. Now he had to make a decision, to continue work on the project or cease production. There wasn't the backdrop of the arms race against the Nazis as kind of a means to an end, kind of necessity. Although the war hadn't fully concluded and there may have been other superpowers building weapons of their own, the immediate need or necessity wasn't as strong at that moment. The aspect of morality had also come into effect, too. And an additional factor to be considered here was also the intent of people, the intent of the people of the world, what they would intend to do with such power. And to me, even after the movie, it wasn't entirely clear what Oppenheimer's true intentions were at this moment, and I think this was deliberate and kind of an indication of our society as well. There seems to be many happenings and events currently that bring into question the idea of intent as well. For example, some of the activities that may be directed towards the youth. Are these groups or people doing these things for the good of society? Or do they just want attention? Do they want more or all of society to pick up their ideologies? Or is it something even more sinister? Also, innovation for the future, I think, is also a prime example of this idea of intent, too. What's the intent of all these new creations and innovations? Is it purely to create new ideas that may help or benefit society? Or could there be more here? At the very least, it appears that there are usually pros and cons to many things, and there may be a wish to overlook many of the risks in the flurry for a new future. Just as an example, there can be a massive spread of manipulations, ideologies, and misinformation with the inception of these new technologies, with more of a means to spread this, to the general public. It seems like each new era of communication seems to enable a more accessible means of spreading information, from the creation of the internet and then also social media afterwards. So how will this next wave of communication or innovation even more enable this information spread? In addition, more and more realistic deep fakes can now be used to shape public perception too. How will this lead to more falsities and also the spread of ideologies? This type of information can really manipulate the world. It can also deeply and significantly harm the actual likeness of the actual person as well. What will happen when these deepfakes become even more realistic? Even actual presidents are being utilized in this way. Will there be a time when deepfakes of anybody can be made? How will this potentially affect society and people in it? Should this be accepted as just being innovation, and what would the intent be here? What about the invention of ChatGPT? Although the original intent may be positive, what could this kind of innovation eventually become? Even now, there's instances that bring into question if ChatGPT may have some particular programming assigned to it in terms of ideology and beliefs. And if it does have this programming, what's the intent here? Even now, ChatGPT is starting to encroach on education and learning with the ability to write essays and take over in different educational assignments. And I mean, there's always a possibility, and we should all at least be aware that ChatGPT or future iterations of ChatGPT doesn't end up turning into Hal.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What about the ideas of the metaverse and virtual reality? Although it may sound awesome and futuristic, there already seems to be many potential downsides and risks associated with this. For example, just the fact that current iterations can really affect people physically with severe motion sickness and nausea, in addition to possible and encroaching disassociation with the real world, at least a diminishment of human-to-human connection in the real world. Even now, it seems like newer generations and society in general is starting to kind of move away from the natural world around us and move more towards a virtual lifestyle. The invention of new AI companions and companionship could also lead to a multitude of results, further adding to the continued diminishment of human connection. How will this affect jobs? With the iteration and development of robotics and other forms of AI that can take over the tasks of these workers, what will happen to the original employees? And how will this help the companies or corporations involved in these ventures, and what would the intent be here? How will these new technologies affect privacy and private information from the general public? What would the intent of those that gained access to this information be? Even now, there's instances of valuable information like credit cards being stolen or taken. Not to mention, there could also start to be an overdependence on AI as the use started to increase. What would happen once the public became dependent on these new technologies? And what would the innovators do then, and what would the intent be now? I think intentions can also change with time. Although it may start out with good ones, I think things may start to adjust as situations start to shift. There's also the aspect of going too far and figuring out where this line is. I do think, though, that many new innovations and ideas have good intentions, especially those in the health industry, where these new innovations can greatly help and aid people in society, as well as make the world a better and more accessible place. But other intentions could also be to make it big, gain power, gain fame, profit, keep their company going, manipulation, or something even more sinister. In fact, there are many out there that may just want to see a dark world and want to help this become actualized. Other certain ideas for the future, or the future iterations of these ideas, would also definitely be able to bolster and improve many aspects of life for many people. But thoughts about pros and cons would come into effect, in addition to how it would affect each person individually, as well as becoming over-reliant on these products, and what would happen if it started to malfunction or it had to be taken away completely. In addition, there's a general conversation about finding more natural solutions as opposed to relying too much or utilizing technology to too high of a degree. And it's also important to think about, as well, just like with Oppenheimer, about what the general public may do with these new technologies or any kind of power. Although there are many that may have the best intentions and be responsible with these new innovations, it would be difficult to assume that every person would act in the same manner. So all in all, I think having at least some thought about intent and overall effect is exceedingly important when making decisions and interacting with the world around us, as well as when dealing with any kind of matter that may have such a profound impact on people and society.